I've lived in the region for quite a few years now, but I live in Loughborough with a young family, and I'm a barrister by trade, but I didn't really come from any kind of fancy upbringing. I was, pretty bang average at school, and my kind of family stories is similar to lots of people in this room. Grandparents came over from the west of Ireland in the 1940s and 50s, didn't have a lot, lived in council housing. Mum went to Polytechnic, became a primary school teacher. Dad was various things, good and bad, but also was at times a greengrocer, at times a salesman. So I've got a pretty straightforward upbringing, worked quite hard, worked in European Parliament for a bit, worked in international trade, climate change, and then decided to become a barrister. So that's my day job now. So I'm from a pretty normal background, but I think my story is very much a story of most people in this room. It's a family supported by a government that built council houses, supported by an NHS, and a mother who worked in state education, and I benefited from state education. And by the way, when I went to university, I only paid £1,000 a year, unlike these guys that pay £9,000 a year. Which is super important, because for everybody in Loughborough, it's aspirational for their children. And actually, when you're talking about a £9 hit when you go to university, I think that's unfair. That's why we're going to get rid of tuition fees. So that's my kind of bit of my story. But I think the Labour story is more important, because I'm just one person. The Labour movement is far more than one person. And the reason the Labour movement first started as trade unions and other groups, cooperative societies and the rest of it, was because people needed to come together in order to represent themselves against often exploitative bosses and other exploitative people within communities. It might be an exploitative landlords. So that's what the Labour movement is about. And then of that movement came the Labour Party, and we've been around for well over 100 years now. Now, our values are that coming together, looking after one another, looking out for the community is the number one priority, and that by doing that, everybody benefits. And I see massive parallels between that set of values, and not just the values of the Muslim community or the Hindu community, but of every religious community. That is what people who are reflective and value their community think, that they have to prioritise other people, we have to invest in each other in order to benefit for our families and for ourselves. And that's the nub of it. That is it. I mean, that's the dividing line between us and the Conservatives, is are you putting yourself first, or are you putting the community first? Are you willing to invest in your brothers and sisters or other families? Are you willing to invest in your communities, or would you rather just squirrel the money away in your own pockets? Because that's the true dividing line here. And I think there are so many different shared values. And we all know that in 2008 there was this massive banking crisis, and in order to address that, the banks were bailed out. And there are various technical financial reasons why that was necessary, and actually it was a Labour government who did it. But it wasn't a Labour government who decided then to inflict the effects of that on on working communities around the country, because that's what's happened since 2008. We've had the Conservative government since 2010 with the Lib Dems, and then the other Conservative government since 2015. And what they've done is cut and cut and cut and cut. And it's not been bankers in the city who have been hit, it's working communities around the country. And that impact has been pretty drastic, and it's often vulnerable groups like disabled people or people who live in poor housing who are suffering. So, and it's not just one cut, it's a number of different cuts that are affecting different people. It's a number of different policies that are affecting different people. So somebody who's on universal credit is also much more likely to be on a 0 hours contract, who's also much likely to be living under an exploitative landlord, or who's on a waiting list trying to get council housing or local authority housing. So the same people have been hit by the same cuts in the same way. And sometimes we don't recognise it because it's crept up on us, and people they've learned to be stoic with it. But actually, it's not fair. It's not on, and we can do a lot better. Now, this hasn't affected everybody symmetrically. Okay, I'm just going to just excuse me one moment, because I've got the stats on my phone. Okay, now I don't know if any of you have heard of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Have you heard of them? Yeah. Right. So they are a government body. They are set up by the government for the purpose of assessing, so looking at and analysing the impacts of various things and how they impact on different people according to what are different protected characteristics, okay? So I'm a lawyer, I don't want to get too legally with you, but you know protected characteristics, things like race, things like religion, things like gender, things like sexual preference, right? So they did some work, because I was talking about things like the benefits freezes, sanctioning, the reforms of the benefit cap, child benefit only going to 2 children. Okay, they've researched all of the cuts like that from the government, okay? And let me tell you that Bangladeshi households will lose £4,400 a year on average, okay? Pakistani households will lose £2,700 a year on average. That is significantly more than white British households, okay? So that is how the cuts, how austerity have impacted in a way that is uneven and unfair across our communities, okay? And that's why we've got to fight back. And that's why we need a Labour government. Now, there's another stat that lone parents will lose £5,250. If you're a single mum, that's £5,250 per year. That's £5,000. It's loads of money, £5,000. And it's £4,500 if you're a Bangladeshi household. So what if you're a Bangladeshi single mum? It's absolutely brutal and it's callous. And do you know what? I know, because I look at this stuff, that if you're a government minister making these decisions, you get these assessments on your desk as you're making the decision. So it's not like they're doing this blind, they're doing it consciously. They're saying we will prioritise an inheritance tax cut for someone who can damn well afford it, over and above protecting our most vulnerable communities or protecting our diversity. So that is the situation that we're in. And that's why I say to people, we've had 9 years of Tory-led government now, 9 years, okay? That's a heck of a long time, right? 9 years. I mean, you guys are 18, aren't you? You're 9 then. So you know, only thing you've known is a Tory government, right? And so we've had 9 years of this. I say to people, imagine what it'll be like with 5 more years of this. It'll be an absolute disaster. And I know because I was born in 1982, grew up under the Tories. 97 we had a Labour government. And let me tell you, things got a damn sight better under Labour. Minimum wage, Human Rights Act. Later we had the Equality Act. That's why we had the stats that I just read to you, okay? Better housing, NHS improved markedly, waiting lists went down massively, education, state education started to be something we can be proud of rather than a laughingstock. So, under a Labour government, things got massively better. Under a Tory government, 9 years, it's got massively worse. I'm not going to say they weren't faced by some financial and fiscal challenges, they were. But they decided to treat them in a way that affected the vulnerable in society far more than the comfortable people down in London and South East working in financial services. And that's the reality of the matter. So, the key takeaway I want you to take away from today is look around you, look around in Loughborough, look around at homelessness in Loughborough, look around at the way vulnerable people are being treated in Loughborough. Alice and I, right, we knocked on a door just off Queen's Road. It was about 2 months ago, wasn't it? And we found a lady in tears, right? And this is a common story. Her children had, and we were in tears by the end of it as well. Her children had done brilliantly, right? They worked really hard. They're both in top universities, but were struggling to make ends meet because the family didn't have any money. They didn't have any money at university. And this lady was absolutely at the end of her tether. Now it helped because Alice, who's one of our counsellors in Loughborough, is not only a great counsellor, she's an advice and guidance worker. So we sent some material to look, go and speak to this person. There's help. Go and get it. But that for me brought home like this family had done everything right. So they educated children. They worked really hard. They got their head down. They'd gone to top universities. They had a really bright future. But all this lady could see was despair because her daughter was at university without any cash. Now, that's why we're bringing back maintenance grants at university. That's why we're getting rid of tuition fees. That's why we're going to make a much fairer benefit system. That's why we're going to have 100,000 affordable homes every year. Because we all know that the housing stock around Loughborough, it's just ain't any good. It's terrible. People are living in terrible conditions. We're going to give people who rent far more rights against their landlords because we know that landlords are not doing their half of the bargain and looking after their properties properly. So we've got a whole transformative programme which is going to make life better for working people, irrespective of your background, all right? So that's why we've invited you today, to tell you about that science